At first, it felt like a small change. Emily told herself it would only be for a few weeks. She tried to make space in the house, cleared out the guest room, and even bought fresh flowers to welcome Ryan's parents. She wanted to be respectful because she loved her husband and believed family was important. But slowly, things began to shift. The warmth she showed was never returned. Carol started taking over small things, cooking, cleaning, deciding what furniture to move. At first, Emily didn't complain. She thought she was being kind. Soon, kindness turned into silence. Carol began correcting her at the dinner table, saying things like, "Oh, honey, that's not how real women cook." Richard made remarks about how lucky Emily was that Ryan put up with her. It was humiliating, but what hurt the most was Ryan's reaction. He didn't stop them. He laughed, brushed it off, and said his parents didn't mean any harm. Emily stopped eating with them some nights just to avoid the tension. The home she once loved no longer felt like hers. Carol rearranged the kitchen, replaced Emily's things with her own, and even took over grocery shopping. Every decision, no matter how small, became a reminder that Emily's opinion didn't matter. When she tried to talk to Ryan, he told her she was too sensitive and that she should be grateful to have his parents around. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when her marriage had turned into a constant struggle to be heard. The disrespect kept growing. Carol criticized her work, telling Ryan that Emily should quit her job and stay home like a proper wife. Richard complained about Emily's schedule and said she was never around when family needed her. Ryan started spending more time with his parents and less with her. The house became filled with whispers, tension, and looks that made Emily feel small. She tried to hold on, reminding herself of the good years, but even her patience began to fade. Then one evening, everything broke. Emily had just come home from work, tired but trying to smile. Carol was sitting in the living room, looking displeased. "I told Ryan I'm not living under the same roof with a woman who disrespects her elders," she said sharply. Emily was shocked. She hadn't done anything. Ryan stood beside his mother, silent, avoiding Emily's eyes. That silence hurt more than any insult ever could. For the first time, Emily realized she was alone in her own home. She walked into the kitchen and saw her things replaced, her photos taken down, her space erased. It felt like she didn't exist anymore. That night, she went into the bathroom, locked the door, and cried quietly, not because of what they did, but because of how easily Ryan allowed it. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this deep, painful silence, would be the start of something that would change everything. At first, Emily tried to ignore the comments. She told herself that Carol was just trying to adjust, and that things would calm down once everyone settled in. But instead of getting better, the atmosphere in the house became heavier every day. Carol started watching everything Emily did, from how she folded the laundry to how she seasoned food. Every small thing turned into a criticism. "You're doing it wrong," she would say, or, "That's not how a proper wife takes care of her husband." Emily bit her tongue more times than she could count. She didn't want to argue, especially in front of Ryan. She hoped he would notice how hurtful his mother's words were. But when Emily finally gathered the courage to tell him how she felt, Ryan only sighed and said, "They're just old-fashioned, Em. Don't take it so personally." That sentence stayed with her. It was the first time she realized he wasn't going to defend her. Richard, on the other hand, treated the house like it was his own. He changed the TV channels while Emily was watching something, left his things scattered everywhere, and even invited friends over without asking. He called the place our home. And every time he said it, Emily felt her heart sink. It wasn't their home. It was hers and Ryan's. Or at least, it used to be. Now she felt like an outsider. One afternoon, Emily came home to find Carol moving things around in the living room. Her favorite lamp was gone, replaced by one Carol brought from storage. "This place needs a woman's touch," Carol said, not even looking up. Emily wanted to scream that it was her home, but instead, she smiled weakly and went to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed and realized that her home didn't feel safe anymore. It wasn't just the words or the actions. It was the way Ryan changed. He used to listen to her, laugh with her, and notice when something was wrong. Now, he brushed her off like her feelings were an inconvenience. When she asked him to have dinner alone, he told her he couldn't because Mom already cooked. Slowly, he was slipping away, and Emily could feel it happening piece by piece. Nights became the hardest. Emily would lie awake, listening to Carol and Richard chatting with Ryan downstairs, their laughter echoing through the house. That used to be their time, the quiet moments they shared after long days. Now, those moments belonged to someone else. She started sleeping facing the wall, pretending not to care, but every laugh felt like another crack in the life she once built. She tried to talk to Ryan again, hoping he'd finally understand. But instead of comfort, he just said, "You need to try harder with them." That was when Emily stopped trying. Something inside her went quiet. She didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't cry in front of him anymore. She just started saving her strength, because deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something much bigger. The kitchen had always been Emily's favorite place in the house. It was where she felt calm, cooking dinner after work, listening to soft music, and waiting for Ryan to come home. But now, even that small comfort was gone. Carol had completely taken over. She moved all the pots, changed the spices, and even threw away some of Emily's favorite dishes. When Emily tried to make dinner one evening, Carol stood beside her, pointing out every move she made. "You don't even know how to chop properly," she said, shaking her head. "No wonder Ryan is losing weight." Emily froze for a moment, holding back tears. She wanted to defend herself, but decided not to make a scene. She quietly finished cooking, pretending she didn't hear. But when Ryan came home and Carol announced proudly that she had saved dinner from being ruined, he just laughed and said, "That's my mom for you." That laugh felt like a knife. Emily forced a smile, but inside she felt something break. As days passed, the insults became constant. Carol criticized the way Emily cleaned, the way she dressed, even the way she talked. Richard joined in too, making cruel jokes about her job. "Ryan could have done better," he'd say, smirking. "You must be really patient, son." Ryan would laugh with them, never once telling them to stop. Emily felt invisible, like her pain didn't matter. One morning, Emily made pancakes before work, hoping to share breakfast with Ryan. But Carol came into the kitchen, took one bite, and spat it out. "No wonder he eats so much takeout," she said loudly. Ryan laughed again. Emily looked at him, waiting for him to say something. Anything, but he just picked up his coffee and walked away. That moment stayed with her all day. When friends asked how things were at home, Emily smiled and said everything was fine. But the truth was, she no longer recognized her own life. The house was full of noise and laughter, but not hers. She moved quietly, trying not to attract attention, doing everything she could to avoid another cruel comment. At night, when everyone was asleep, she locked herself in the bathroom, turned on the shower so no one would hear, and cried. She cried for the love that was fading, for the man who had become a stranger, and for herself, the woman who used to be strong but now felt smaller every day. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized the tired face staring back. Still, she told herself to hold on a little longer. Maybe things would change. Maybe Ryan would wake up and see what was happening. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered the truth, that the man who once promised to protect her had become the one letting her break. And for the first time, Emily started wondering how much more she could take before something inside her finally gave up. Dinner that night started like every other, quiet, uncomfortable, and heavy with unspoken tension. Emily had come home late from work, tired but determined to stay calm. She set the table, hoping maybe they could have one peaceful meal. Carol and Richard were already seated, talking about how busy women forget what real family means. Emily ignored the jab and served the food, trying to focus on keeping her hands from shaking. As soon as she sat down, Carol looked at the table and sighed loudly. "You didn't even fold the napkins properly. I don't know how you run a household like this." Richard chuckled and said, "She's more focused on her fancy job than her home." Emily swallowed hard and tried to stay quiet. But then Carol said the words that broke everything. "Ryan deserves someone who can take care of him, not a woman who works all day and leaves her home a mess." For a moment, there was silence. Emily looked at Ryan, waiting, hoping he would finally say something in her defense. But he didn't. He didn't even look at her. Instead, he smiled faintly and said, "Mom's just being honest." That sentence felt like the final crack in a glass that had already been breaking for months. Emily couldn't finish her meal. She quietly stood up, took her plate to the sink, and walked upstairs. No one stopped her. In their laughter and small talk, she realized she had become invisible. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, her hands shaking. All the nights she had cried in silence, all the times she had been told to be patient. It all led to this. She finally understood that there was nothing left to fix. She opened her closet and pulled out a small bag. She didn't take much, just a few clothes, her wallet, and her car keys. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was strangely calm. For once, she wasn't overthinking. She walked downstairs, hearing them still talking in the dining room, and slipped out the door quietly. The night air was cold, but it felt freeing. Emily drove to her friend Lauren's apartment. Lauren had always told her she didn't deserve the way Ryan treated her, but Emily never listened. When Lauren opened the door and saw her standing there with tears in her eyes and a small bag in her hand, she didn't ask questions. She just hugged her. For the first time in a long while, Emily let herself cry freely. That night, as she lay on Lauren's couch, staring at the ceiling, she felt a strange peace. The pain was still there, but underneath it was relief. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She was done begging for respect. She was done waiting for someone to choose her. For the first time in years, she had chosen herself. The first few days after Emily left felt strange. She kept checking her phone, expecting Ryan to call, to ask where she was, to say he missed her. But he didn't. The silence was louder than any argument they'd ever had. Every morning, she woke up hoping there would be a message that sounded like love or regret. But all she got was one short text. "If you can't handle my family, maybe you're not cut out to be a wife." Emily stared at those words for a long time. Her hands trembled, but she didn't cry. Something inside her had already gone numb. It wasn't shock, it was acceptance. That message told her everything she needed to know. She realized she wasn't losing a husband. She was freeing herself from someone who had never respected her. Lauren tried to comfort her, saying Ryan would regret it one day. But Emily didn't want to wait for that day anymore. She was tired of waiting for apologies that never came. She deleted the message and turned off her phone. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to explain herself or beg to be heard. The silence that used to hurt now started to feel like peace. Each morning, she tried to bring back small routines that made her feel alive. She started walking to a nearby park, sitting on a bench, and just breathing in the quiet air. She applied for new projects at work, throwing herself into things she could control. She told herself that this wasn't the end of her story. It was the start of a new one. But the nights were the hardest. Sometimes she woke up suddenly, reaching for the other side of the bed before remembering where she was. The loneliness was real, but so was the relief. There were no insults, no judgment, no cold stares. Just silence, a silence that slowly began to heal her. A week passed, then two. Ryan never came looking for her. Carol didn't call either. It was like they had erased her from their lives, and strangely, that made it easier for Emily to move on. She stopped checking her phone completely. Instead, she focused on herself. She started cooking again, not for anyone else, but for herself. She decorated Lauren's small balcony with flowers and laughed for the first time in months when they had dinner together outside. One evening, while watching the sunset, Emily realized she no longer felt angry. She felt grateful that life had forced her to stop settling for less than she deserved. She knew she had been through humiliation and heartbreak, but she also knew something was changing inside her. The woman who once stayed quiet to keep the peace was learning how to live in peace by herself. And in that silence, she found something stronger than love. She found her own worth. Emily found a small apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. The first night she moved in, she sat on the floor surrounded by boxes, eating takeout straight from the container. For the first time in a long while, the silence didn't scare her. It felt comforting, like a clean start. There were no footsteps following her, no voices criticizing her, no one telling her what to do. Just peace. The next morning, she got up early and went to work. She threw herself completely into her projects, spending long hours at her desk, sketching, planning, and meeting clients. Her boss noticed her dedication and started giving her bigger opportunities. She wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. She was doing it for herself. Every design she completed felt like a piece of her life coming back together. After a few months, one of her clients, a kind older woman named Mrs. Grant, was so impressed with Emily's work that she introduced her to a friend who owned several high-end properties. That connection changed everything. Within a year, Emily opened her own design studio. She started small, working from her apartment at first, but her reputation grew quickly. People loved her style, elegant, warm, and full of life, just like the woman she was becoming again. During this time, Ryan sent a few texts. At first, they were short and distant. "Hope you're okay." Then they turned into guilt-filled messages about how hard things had become at home and how he missed her. Emily read them but never replied. She didn't hate him, she just didn't care anymore. The part of her that once longed for his attention was gone. All she wanted now was peace, and she finally had it. In her new apartment, Emily filled the walls with her own designs. Colors that made her happy, soft lights that calmed her after long days, and plants that made the space feel alive. She cooked in her small kitchen, played her favorite music, and danced while waiting for dinner to be ready. Little by little, she started smiling again, not because of someone else, but because she had created a life that felt safe and real. One evening, as she sat on her balcony with a cup of tea, she thought about how much had changed. She had left behind a house that never felt like home and built one that finally did. She realized that sometimes you have to lose everything, love, comfort, even security, to find yourself again. Her days were simple but full. Work, laughter, and quiet evenings replaced tears and tension. And as the city lights glowed below her balcony, Emily understood something clearly. The silence that once felt empty was now the sound of her freedom. She had rebuilt her life, not just her career or home, but her heart. A full year had passed since Emily last spoke to Ryan. Her life had changed completely. Her design studio was doing well, she had a few trusted employees, and her work was being featured in a local magazine. She was calm, content, and no longer felt the weight of the past. Then, one quiet afternoon, her phone rang. The screen showed a name she hadn't seen in months, Ryan. For a moment, Emily just stared at it. Her first instinct was to ignore the call, but something inside her said to pick up. When she answered, the voice on the other end sounded nothing like the man she once knew. Ryan's tone was shaky and tired. He asked how she'd been, but Emily could tell this wasn't a casual call. After a pause, he admitted things at home had fallen apart. He told her that his parents never left. What was supposed to be a temporary stay had turned into something permanent. Carol now made every decision in the house, from the furniture to what meals they ate. She treated Ryan the same way she once treated Emily, criticizing everything he did and reminding him how ungrateful he was. Richard had taken over the finances, saying it was for the good of the family, but Ryan discovered too late that most of his savings were gone. Ryan said he felt trapped. "I can't breathe in my own house," he said quietly. "Every day I come home, and it feels like I'm walking into someone else's life." Emily listened, her expression calm. There was no anger left, just a strange sense of understanding. The same pain she once felt had finally found its way back to him. He confessed he regretted everything. Not standing up for her, not listening, not realizing how much she had endured. "You were right, Emily," he said, his voice breaking. "I let them ruin everything." Emily was silent for a moment, thinking about all the nights she had cried alone, all the times she had begged him to see what was happening. And now, here he was finally seeing it, when it no longer mattered. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Ryan," she said, "I hope you find the strength to stand up for yourself, like I finally did." There was no anger, no bitterness, just truth. Ryan didn't say much after that. He only whispered that he missed her and wished things had been different. Emily thanked him for calling and ended the conversation. After she hung up, she sat quietly for a while. Instead of sadness, she felt peace. Life had come full circle. The same house where she once felt small and unwanted had now become his cage. It wasn't revenge. It was just life showing him the lessons she had already learned. That evening, Emily went back to work, sketching designs for a new client. Her hands were steady, her mind clear. For the first time, she realized how far she'd come, from being broken by someone's silence to becoming strong enough to walk away without looking back. Months went by, and Emily's career kept growing. Her design studio was now one of the most talked about in the city. She had more clients than she could handle and had even hired a small team to help her. Every project she took on seemed to lead to another, and people admired her for her calm, creative style. Life was simple, busy, and peaceful. She didn't think much about the past anymore. It was a closed chapter, or so she thought. One day, she received an email from a company looking to renovate a luxury property. The name on the message caught her eye. It was from one of Ryan's old co-workers, Mark. He had seen her work online and wanted her to design the interior of a new high-end restaurant. Emily agreed, not because of the connection, but because the project sounded exciting. She threw herself into it completely, spending weeks planning every detail. When the work was done, the place looked beautiful, elegant, warm, and modern. Mark was thrilled and invited her to the grand opening, saying many business people, including some familiar faces, would be attending. Emily didn't think much of it until the night of the event. The restaurant was full of people, laughter, and music. Emily was standing near one of her designs, talking to a client, when she heard a voice she hadn't heard in months. It was Ryan's. She turned and saw him walking in with his parents. Carol looked the same, proud and sharp, but the moment her eyes landed on Emily, her expression froze. Ryan's face went pale. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Mark walked over, smiling. "Ryan, Carol, you have to meet our designer, Emily. She's the reason this place looks incredible." Emily smiled politely, shaking Ryan's hand as if he were a stranger. "It's good to see you," she said calmly. "I guess being useless paid off after all." Carol's jaw tightened, and Richard avoided eye contact. People around them began complimenting Emily on her work, admiring her talent and professionalism. Ryan just stood there, speechless. The woman they once looked down on was now being praised by everyone in the room. Emily didn't stay long. After a few polite conversations, she thanked Mark and stepped outside into the cool evening air. As she stood there, she took a deep breath and smiled. She hadn't planned for this moment, but life had delivered it perfectly. She didn't need to say much or prove anything. The scene spoke for itself. As she walked to her car, Emily felt lighter than ever. Her revenge hadn't come through anger or spite. It came through success, peace, and dignity. The same people who once tried to break her now had to watch her shine. And the best part was, she hadn't done it to hurt them. She had done it to heal herself. That night, as she drove home, the city lights blurred past her window, and she realized she no longer carried any bitterness, only quiet victory. After the restaurant event, Ryan started calling and texting again. At first, Emily ignored the messages, but they kept coming. He apologized for everything, for letting his parents control their lives, for not standing up for her, for making her feel small. He said he finally understood how wrong he had been and that he missed her more than ever. He wanted to meet, to talk, to start fresh. But Emily didn't reply. She read his words, but they didn't stir anything inside her. The pain, the anger, the sadness, all of it was gone. What was left was peace. The kind of peace that comes only after surviving chaos. She realized that the version of herself who once waited for his affection no longer existed. That woman had cried enough, begged enough, and finally learned that silence could be stronger than any response. Ryan didn't give up easily. He showed up at her office one afternoon, waiting outside the building. When she saw him, she felt an old familiarity, but no emotion. He looked tired, older somehow, as if life had finally caught up to him. He said he had moved out of his parents' house and wanted another chance to make things right. Emily listened quietly, her expression calm. When he finished talking, she said softly, "Ryan, I'm glad you're trying to change. But I'm not the same person anymore." Her voice was steady, but there was kindness in it. "What we had ended a long time ago. I've forgiven you, but I've also moved on." Ryan tried to speak again, but she stopped him gently. "You taught me something important, that peace is worth more than love that hurts." He nodded slowly, realizing she meant it. There was no anger in her eyes, no bitterness, only strength. He left quietly, and Emily stood there for a moment, feeling an odd mix of closure and freedom. It was finally over. That night, she went home and sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer below. She thought about everything, the pain, the humiliation, the heartbreak, and how far she had come since then. She didn't need revenge, because life had already taken care of that. Ryan was living with the consequences of his choices, and she was living in peace. Emily smiled to herself. She had built a life filled with calm mornings, meaningful work, and genuine happiness. There was no room left for anger. The silence that once broke her was now her strength. As she closed her eyes, she whispered a quiet thank you, not to Ryan, but to herself, for not giving up when it would have been easier to stay broken. She had learned that real closure doesn't come from someone's apology. It comes from finally being free enough not to need one. And for Emily, that freedom was the sweetest ending she could have asked for. When Emily looked back on everything that had happened, she didn't feel pain anymore. The memories that once made her cry now felt distant, like a book she had already finished reading. She didn't hate Ryan or his parents. In fact, she felt thankful, because if they hadn't broken her spirit back then, she would never have discovered her own strength. One evening, while having coffee with her friend Lauren, They talked about how far she had come. Lauren smiled and said, "You've really changed, Em. I remember the nights you used to cry, and now look at you, peaceful, confident, happy." Emily smiled back and replied softly, "They tried to make me feel small in my own home. But walking away from that place was the start of me finding who I really am." She realized that leaving wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a turning point, the moment she chose peace over approval, self-respect over comfort, and growth over fear. The woman she had become was built from all the pain she once endured. Every tear she had shed had watered the ground she now stood strong on. People who met her now saw a calm, graceful woman who carried herself with quiet confidence. They had no idea about the battles she once fought behind closed doors, the insults, the silence, the loneliness. But Emily didn't need them to know. Her peace spoke louder than any story ever could. Sometimes, when she worked late in her design studio, she would pause and look around at the walls she had decorated herself. Warm colors, soft lights, little touches that made the space feel like home. It was a reflection of her journey, built piece by piece, patiently with care. Every corner held a reminder that she had created a life on her own terms. One afternoon, she received a message from a young woman who had followed her work online. The girl wrote, "Your story gives me hope. I'm in a marriage where I feel invisible, but seeing you thrive makes me believe I can rebuild too." Emily read the message with a lump in her throat. She replied, "You can. Don't wait for someone to save you. Save yourself." That moment made Emily realize that her story wasn't just about her anymore. It had become something bigger, a message for every woman who had ever been made to feel less than enough. She didn't need revenge or recognition. Her success, her peace, her quiet smile, they were proof that she had won. Sometimes strength isn't loud. It's in the calm after the storm, in the choice to walk away and never look back. Emily had learned that you don't always fight to prove them wrong. You simply rise so high that they can't reach you anymore. And that, to her, was the most beautiful victory of all.